Good evening. This is discussion board post 1, 2, and 3 for our criminal procedure class. Each of the questions that were provided in this I've seen in my career, or at least been experienced with each of them, and I think it's important to know each question and what it means to law enforcement, because the application of each is definitely a necessity for anyone who needs to know what criminal procedure is comprised of. So with that being said, the first question was to explain the plea bargaining advantages and disadvantages. So just to kind of put it out there, plea bargaining is a tool utilized by the prosecution or defense of any case to negotiate a term of agreeance, often that the defendant pleads to a lesser included charge to seek the successful prosecution of the case. Plea bargaining advantages are it takes less resources from the state to present a case. Another advantage is, you don't run the risk from the prosecution side. You don't run the risk of not getting the case prosecuted at all. Maybe if it's a case to which the facts are circumstantial in nature and it could be open to perception of how it is. I think, a lot of times plea bargaining could be an advantage to the prosecution to utilize. I think advantages in plea bargaining works hand in hand with disadvantages. The disadvantages are obviously everybody should be afforded a fair trial. And often, defendants may be limited in their resources as far as their attorney goes or representation may go. And they may feel that they need to plead to a lesser included charge and thus are found guilty of a crime with maybe a case that lacks evidence. So I think the advantages and disadvantages play to either side of the aisle. Going back to the advantages, if a defendant feels that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence and he can plead to a lesser included charge, maybe he comes out with a lesser sentence. We see this oftentimes in crimes against persons, specifically murders, in which they reach a plea bargain so that the defendant doesn't receive the death penalty. The prosecution doesn't seek out the death penalty, and they reach a plea bargain to plea to the crime so that they, in return, get life imprisonment. Moving along to number 2, it says explain the advantages, disadvantages of an arrest with a warrant instead of an arrest without a warrant. I think best practice always, I worked in a drug enforcement group, best practice is, as it pertains to search warrants, all the time, anytime we're speaking with our patrol guys, if you see something that's evidence, just stop what you're doing and call us, and we will come out and write a search warrant. As this question is specific to arrest, a warrant is always best practice, and I believe the advantages of a warrant prior to the arrest is that the case has already been presented to a judge, outside party who has found probable cause to issue the warrant for their arrest. Now, the advantages of warrants without arrest, or an arrest without a warrant, would be that the expediting of that offender and their opportunity to flee from arrest. So anytime we're on a traffic stop, we find probable cause to arrest that individual, or we're at an instance of family violence where there's enough evidence to support arresting that individual and then obtaining a warrant, that is always, it's imperative, and it's an advantage to law enforcement to be able to utilize that rule. So like I said, advantages and disadvantages on both sides. Last question, explain the difference between probable cause and reasonable suspicion. Probable cause is exactly what the definition is. It's a set of facts or circumstances that would lead a reasonable and prudent person to believe that a crime has been committed. And reasonable suspicion is a lesser included to that. And the best example I could say is, a probable cause as far as patrol capacity. Probable cause would be defined as you see an individual who runs a stop sign that's a violation of law, and you have the opportunity to stop that individual. That would be probable cause. A good example of reasonable suspicion would be you're on surveillance of a gas station and you see two individuals who make contact. They do a hand-to-hand transaction in the car, and you believe that to be suspicious in the fact that it's common with drug transactions. So you encounter the subjects to investigate that further. That doesn't mean that you can't develop probable cause beyond that. Say when you get up to the car and you smell the odor of marijuana, you've established a set of facts that would lead someone to believe that there's marijuana contained therein. So essentially, the difference between probable cause and reasonable suspicion is that reasonable suspicion is less than what probable cause is. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you listening to me and giving feedback.